Okay, guys, we're gonna wrap up our PowerPoints and our class today. We're gonna look at Baby Bush, and we're gonna get into Barack Obama. So we're right at modern times. So the main idea, following a troubled election, Republican George W. Bush won the White House and strongly promoted his agenda. And we're going to see that George W. Bush faced a lot of challenges during his period. But makes George W. Bush unique is that he was a historian president. He recognized he had some failures, but still contends that from the information he received, he did the best he could. And what else can you ask, President? So whether you like him or you don't, you have to respect that ideal that he understands that decision making, you can't validate it. You can't say it's good or bad because you don't know everything that the person knew at the time. So let's take a gander here. What was the unusual circumstance of the election in 2000? The Democrats. The economy prospered and the government had a budget surplus. But some of the Democrats were really uncomfortable with Clinton's image. He really made the president look bad and he made the Democrats look bad. Al Gore was a Democratic nominee and he chose Joe Lieberman as running mate. Now, Al Gore was different than Clinton, where Clinton was outgoing, very flamboyant, very charismatic. Al Gore was an intellectual and he was very dull. If you could remember Herman Monster from um, any TV show, you can Google him, Herman Monster. He's about how Al Gore was. But the Republican chose George W. Bush, whose running mate was Dick Cheney of Wyoming. Now, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, George W. Bush wasn't experienced per se. He was the governor of Texas. He was the owner of the Texas Rangers. He wasn't your typical candidate running. He didn't have a lot of experience or a strong background. But what he did have was he was charismatic and he had a lineage. His dad, George Bush, was a president. And what happened was see a troubled election. Election night shows the race was really close, and the state that decided the winner was Florida. But the Florida election was so close that no one could tell, and people had to continually call for retest. So let's dive in and see what this is all about. So the first, let's look at the recounts. A Florida account gave Bush 300 more votes than Gore. Now, 300 may seem like a lot, but just think about if there's just 300 votes in Texas, that means that that's only 1% of the Dallas Metroplex population. 1%. That's less than 1% of Florida, and that's like 1/100th of a percent for the United States. And Democrats really question the Florida ballot. So thousands of ballots have gone uncounted. Many ballots were rejected because machines made mistakes. So Democrats wanted a hand reelection of ballots. Republicans opposed this, and both sides filed lawsuits. So what happened was we had the Supreme Court case, Bush versus Gore, and the Florida Supreme Court ordered recounts in certain Florida counties. Bush appealed the ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court that a recount was unconstitutional. You can't keep on recounting just because you don't like the results. So after the court ruling, Gore conceded the presidency, and Bush became the president, dispute of having received fewer popular votes than his opponent, but still winning. Even though he didn't have enough popular votes, he still had more of the electoral college votes, and that's all you needed. So as Bush took office, the economy began to slow. Basically, like talking about earlier, Clinton, it wasn't his programs per se that really helped out the economy. It's because the dot-com industries, computer industries, took a huge boom. But when Bush took office, the economy started to slow. Dot-com profits failed, and because of that, stock market prices took a major hit. And Bush passed tax cuts for the rich, trying to fulfill campaign promises and spur a slumping economy. And what happened was the new tax cuts kind of reduced the marriage penalty and lowered the estate's taxes. Basically, he was cutting taxes for the rich. And because of that, he hoped that they would start hiring more people for their jobs and it would help out the entire economy. But they didn't. They put it in the bank and tried to save it. So the economy didn't improve and we went into a recession. And the tax cuts 2003 eliminated the tax on dividends. So Bush had three main domestic policies. His number one, the largest thing that we remember him for is education. And Bush announced the No Child Left Behind Act to improve education. All right, how many of y'all hate taking tests? Guess what? That's part of Bush's plan. States were required to develop academic standards and test students annually to ensure that the standards were being met. He did this not to punish kids because he wasn't like Mitch Kinnemer. He didn't just hate kids. He was trying to make teachers accountable so that all children, not just the rich children, could receive quality education. Healthcare. Many people don't think of Bush for healthcare. They think of Obama for it. But Bush updated the Medicare program. He included benefits to help Medicare recipients pay for prescription medication, which has been lacking. And he established the White Office of Faith-Based Initiatives to help religious community service organizations develop greater access to federal funding. And it helped spread the religious diversity among America. So Bush ran against second term against John Kerry of Massachusetts, who was another very boring individual. And Bush announced his plan to reform Social Security. By late 2005, Congress had not acted on Bush's idea to privatize Social Security, which would try to extend it because he knew the Social Security problem was coming. Bush also filled vacancies in the Supreme Court. He appointed John Roberts as Chief Justice, and Bush named Harriet Miers to replace Sandra Day O'Connor, but she withdrew her name from contention. So Bush nominated conservative judge Samuel Alito to replace O'Connor in 2005. So Bush's foreign policy, the people and the policies. First, let's look at the people. He had Colin Powell as Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor, which fantastic person. If you're ever curious, especially girls, y'all here in the right, look up Condoleezza Rice. Fantastic, brilliant woman. After the 2004 election, Powell resigned and Rice took over as Secretary of State. And Donald Rumsfeld took over Secretary of Defense. But let's look at the policy. They canceled the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and this caused friction between the U.S. and the Soviet Union and China. Bush helped promote the so-called Middle East Roadmap to Peace, and the most important foreign policy ever was the terrorist attack on 9/11. It changed the way America functioned in foreign policy. Instead of focusing on communism, we now started to look at global terrorism. So September 11th, how it really did change America. The horrific attack on September 11, 2001, awakened the nation to the threat of terrorism. It changed our view of the world. We didn't really observe terrorism as being a main problem. But after the devastation of the Twin Towers, we realized that there needed to be some change. So basically, this September 11th attack. Terrorists hijacked two planes, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, and crashed them to the World Trade Center. Terrorists hacked American Airlines Flight 77 and crashed the Pentagon, and terrorists hijacked United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed in southwestern Pennsylvania. In New York and Virginia, firefighters and police officers rushed to the scene of the accidents. So let's look at the Twin Towers because they really signify what this whole thing's about. The others are no, there was major deaths in the Pentagon and all the plane crew members and people who died in Pennsylvania. But the Twin Towers really is our embodiment because so many people died. Both the South and North Towers, the World Trade Center collapsed, and fire caused by the plane's fuel tanks weakened the building structure because the jet airline fuel burned so hot that it could melt the steel. And it stunned nations watching the event unfold on the television. Guys, I was a little bit younger than y'all, and our class for that entire day, even though we were in San Antonio, it wasn't, we're not a big city. We're the sixth largest city in the United States, but nowhere that terrorists would attack. We didn't have class that entire day. We sat there and watched the news, and about half of the kids were removed from school that day. Now, my mom didn't care about me, apparently, because she didn't come get me. Probably because she didn't want to deal with me any longer than she had to. But it's significant, guys. It stopped the entire world. It really did. It stopped the entire world and made them understand and grow a little bit closer together. It created a new American spirit. The death toll was staggering. 265 people on the four airplanes were killed. And there's estimates of the death of the World Trade Center were in the thousands. We really couldn't tell because we didn't know who was there, who got out. We had no idea. There was thousands upon thousands of people who died. After years of investigations, the New York death toll stood at 2,749, but we're still not sure. We think it's about that. And 125 people died in the Pentagon. So the nation reacts. People didn't know really how to feel. They were angry, they were sad, and many admired New York firefighters and Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Americans reached out to the victims. They donated money, blood. You had this huge patriotism that spread from this, and I'm speaking really from memory because this is living memory for me. Y'all were barely 4 or 5. This is this is actual life experiences for me. And it was just fascinating to see how the nation turned from just regular old nation to a nation where people were wearing basically flags on their shirts. They were proud to be Americans. We saw this change, this patriotism develop. And Osama bin Laden and his terrorist network known as Al Qaeda planned to carry out the attacks. So because of this, America went on a war on terror. And we see that in the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. So the war in Afghanistan, a group known as the Taliban ruled the Afghanistan, and the government was under strict Islamic law, and they had close relationships to bin Laden. So Bush demanded that the Taliban seize bin Laden and give him to the United States. The Taliban refused, so the United States invaded Afghanistan. And the results of the war, U.S. and British troops relied on fighters of Afghanistan's Northern Alliance, a group that opposed the Taliban, and they trained them and equipped them and fought with them. And the Taliban was defeated by early December, but many still fought guerrilla warfare. And bin Laden was never captured, or wasn't captured at the time. Eventually, we would see years later that Osama bin Laden was captured and killed under Barack Obama's presidency. So terrorism at home. Basically, Bush did two things. He created the Department of Homeland Security, which wanted to protect the border and make sure that terrorism didn't succeed in America. And they passed the Patriot Act, which took away a lot of or some American rights. They tapped phone wires. It was a way the government can spy more on its citizens to protect them. So it took away some American rights, but also strengthened our defense policy. In Iraq, Bush declared war on terror and listed Iraq as a possible foe. Iraq, they said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction after the Gulf War, and we didn't know if Iraq destroyed them. Although Iraq allowed weapon inspectors in following 9/11, Bush insisted that Iraq had failed to account for its weapons, that it was known to possess after the Persian War. And many of America's allies were against going to war with Iraq, but Bush insisted that Iraq was a threat and went to war. And we never found weapons of mass destruction. But Iraq, the dictator was removed, and Iraq now has a democracy. Within a month, Saddam's regime fell. American forces remained in Iraq to try to keep order and train troops. Terrorists continued to take a large toll on American soldiers and Iraqi citizens, and Bush faced tons of criticism when no weapons of mass destruction was found. But he was able to be reelected, and eventually, through Obama's tenure, troops were withdrew. So, a dawn of a new century found America facing a ton of new challenges. We see that American population shifts are changing. Americans are getting older, and we see that a problem with our retirement rate is so huge that it's difficult to determine how long Social Security will change. We saw that people move from the Rust Belt up in the north in Pennsylvania, or in Pennsylvania, Ohio, the Great Lakes region, down to the Sun Belt, which is in the south. And we see that the minority groups, in air quotes again, made up only about 30%, or will make up about 30% of the population by 2000. Sorry. They make about 30% of the population today, but by 2050, they'll make up 50% of the population. And we have to change our way of thought because with a larger minority group in America, can we keep Anglo values as American values, or do we have to start changing? And y'all know my opinion. We really should have started changing a long time ago. So new technology, we see computers, genetic engineering, and space stations on Mars is going to be our future. Computers are developing like wildfire. We're going to see more computerized worlds. Genetic engineering is making food bigger, stronger, more adaptive. We're going to see world hunger hopefully be able to be solved pretty soon. And eventually we're going to see a person land on the moon, like that new commercial that's on about where will you be when someone lands foot on Mars. That's